in Kabbalah Part 1, we cover the history, we cover more details about how Jewish mysticism and other ancient traditions inform Hermetic Qabalah as we know it today. So I'm going to do a little bit of a recap here in Part 2, but we're just going to dive pretty much right into things after the recap. So don't worry. A lot of this stuff I also cover in Part 1. So if you go back to Part 1 after being here in Part 2, you'll see the similarities, and your brain will ping you and say, oh, I've heard about this before. All of this stuff kind of overlaps on itself. And that's part of the learning process, right? Is to like find the different connections, make those different neural connections in your brain, and see how everything overlaps into the fuller picture. So don't worry, it's a lot of stuff. But by the end of this series, I think this is going to be like a 5-part series. You guys will be masters on Kabbalah. First, let's recap what we learned about the Hermetic Qabalah last time. So the origins of the Hermetic Qabalah are complex and multifaceted. It's a syncretic synthesis of ancient texts and mystical practices, philosophies, and mystery teachings that scholars agree can date back to at least the 5th century BCE and maybe even further. The key influences in Kabbalah are Jewish mysticism, specifically Merkaba mysticism and the rabbinical Hechelo, and eventually the Jewish Kabbalah with a K, which includes the studies of ancient astrology, astronomy, and ritual practice. Jewish mysticism also has its ties to Arabic philosophy, and the Hermetic Qabalah especially draws on Egyptian religion, Hellenistic philosophy, Neoplatonism, and especially sacred geometry. And now we're going to cover how the Tree of Life came into being. Like, why is it that it's this shape in particular that the Kabbalah uses? Why is it this particular set of circles, this particular set of paths? Well, the Tree of Life grows from the seed of life, which is the circles in the background here. And the Tree of Life is the central pillar in the middle of the seed of life. It literally grows from the seed of life. And the seed of life is a multi-dimensional sacred geometrical expression of the nature of infinitely unfolding divine consciousness, starting with source consciousness, spontaneously expanding its awareness into the vesica piscis and looping around and around ad infinitum. So as a visual presentation, this is source consciousness, and it spontaneously decides to duplicate itself, and it moves its conscious awareness into another form. This is the vesica piscis. And as it spontaneously loops around and around, it keeps moving and moving, and it keeps forming and forming infinitely. The best known example of sacred geometry is the flower of life. And the flower of life is an ancient symbol depicted across cultures and regions of the world. Like, you can find the symbol everywhere, from China to Egypt. The Sumerians had this in their reliefs, and there's evidence of the Tree of Life and the Flower of Life even in Mayan architecture and art. This symbol permeates our cultural consciousness in so many different ways that it's impossible to differentiate it from something that's just completely made up, right? And it represents the sacred knowledge of the universe. And within it are all of the Platonic solids. So if you were to connect the vertices of these points in different ways, you could create a tetrahedron, you can create a cube, you can create an octahedron, you can create all of the Platonic solids. It contains the golden spiral, so the Fibonacci sequence. If you were to spiral it out like this, starting from the center point, that would be the Fibonacci spiral, and it corresponds to the golden ratio, and so much more. There could be an entire class on the flower of life. It's the very fabric of the universe, and its mysteries unfold in various mythologies, from Indra's jeweled net in the Hindu cosmology to the Mayan calendar, which used the movement of a circle within a circle to form dates based on the lunar and solar cycles. So this is, so from Wikipedia, if you were to search Indra's net, they recently added a really cool 3D depiction of what that looks like based on the on the Hindu texts, and how they're described. And so these individual bubbles, they're like the net of the universe. And that would be corresponding to like a 5-dimensional idea of what the flower of life looks like. And same thing with the Tzolk'in calendar. This outer circle represents the same boundaries and limits of source consciousness, and this central circle here moves around in a similar pattern as the shape of the flower of life, and how it moves between source form and more complex form. But most importantly, the flower of life contains within it the origin of consciousness and the process by which consciousness takes material form. This brings us to Genesis 28:12. This is the story of Jacob, who had a dream of a ladder going up into heaven. And Genesis 28:12 goes, he, Jacob, had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. But who are the angels? According to Hermetic Qabalah, angels are archetypal emanations of God, or what I like to call the divine cosmic soup. These energies of the cosmos, they perpetually ascend and descend from ethereal to gross form in a spontaneous, non-linear process. So these angels, they're climbing up the ladder, they're climbing down the ladder, and they keep going up and down the ladder. They have missions, they have things to do. They need to go back to the heavenly frequencies, and they need to do something there, and then they bring the heavenly frequencies down to earth, whatever. Like there's a constant fluctuation of these energies, and they don't happen across linear time. And it's affected in all things and animate beings in distinct degrees or worlds through which it passes. I mean, this idea is very psychedelic, right? Like it brings up this really cool concept of, you know, like Mandelbrot sets, where if you constantly zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, things become more and more complex, and they infinitely take different shapes. Or if you think about the Fibonacci spiral and how it keeps circling and circling and circling and circling, like these concepts are integral to understanding the Hermetic Qabalah, because this idea of the energy of the cosmos ascending and descending from ethereal to gross form is something that we experience on a day-to-day basis, which is something that we'll cover later on, and the means by which we come up with an idea, bring it into material form. So for example, like having a spontaneous idea to go to the pool, you know, suddenly you're like, I desire water, I desire to swim. And so you go and you take your body over to the pool and you take a dip into the water. So it's something as simple as that, is the same type of ascension and descension from ethereal to gross form that consciousness takes on in a more ephemeral plane. But how does something start as nothing and then turn into something, right? Because the idea here is that the origin of the universe, the cosmogony of the universe is that there was nothing. And then out of the blue, just like all of creation came into existence. So the sacred geometry in the Hermetic Qabalah speaks to that. And specifically with regard to Jacob's ladder, we need to pay attention to the central column, the central pillar here of the flower of life. So within each circle of the central pillar here is a seed of life. And from each seed sprouts a tree of life, right? So each central pillar here, each central circle has a tree of life. And from these trees of life sprout the 4 worlds. And each of these 4 worlds over here, so if you were to superimpose all of the trees of life together, this is what they look like from the central column of the flower of life. Each of these 4 worlds represent a stage of consciousness, beginning with the world of Atziluth, or the world of emanation, which is this first red circle here. Consciousness it has a process. It doesn't just spontaneously, I mean, it does spontaneously turn into reality, but it goes through a process. It has to go through different stages in order to become made manifest, in order to become a gross material form. So each of these worlds encompasses the wholeness and perplexity of the spirit, mind, heart, and body. And each world is one that spirit or the divine consciousness passes through on its journey to and from Earth. In part 2 today, here's another example of Jacob's Ladder. I thought this painting by William Blake was really beautiful. And it is literally a ladder descending from heaven. And there are people going up to heaven, and then there are people coming down to Earth. And ultimately, this particular painting depicts it as a form of death. But something that I find very interesting about Jacob's Ladder and the idea of heaven and hell is that heaven and hell is within us. So Atziluth is the emanation of fire. It's the spirit of spontaneity and desire. And Atziluth, fire, and first Sephirot called Kether in the Tree of Life are associated with the wands in the tarot. So Atziluth is pure divinity. It's the overflowing, gushing spring. And it's also the Big Bang. It's contraction, so minute, concentrated, and juicy that it can't help but explode, like the sun in its final form, ready to go supernova. And it's here that we start contemplating the first emanations of the divine. So in the world of Atziluth, we start to get into the nitty-gritty of how nothing turns into something. Because in the world of Atziluth, nothing has not really taken shape yet. It's just an idea. It's like the first spark of inspiration. And one of you wrote in the question to sign up for this class that you associate inspiration with promptings from the subconscious. And I felt that this was a particularly apt description for what happens in the world of Atziluth. Just like source consciousness spontaneously moved its perspective to form the Vesica Pisces, the world of Atziluth is the first light and the first doorway to the material world. And as we covered in part 1 of the series, the rabbis in the rabbinical Hechalo described descending into heaven through many doors and layers, where they encounter gates and guardians that they have to have passcodes for. And we also see the same descriptors in underworld mythology, which illuminate the idea of traveling through gates, encountering guardians, and entering a throne room, like in the Mesopotamian myth and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So you can think of the world of Atziluth as the first layer that consciousness passes through to enter Earth. Everything that I just described, it's, kind of hard to grasp, right? Because it's on this great cosmic scale. And each Sephirot that the divine emanation passes through becomes more and more tangible until it reaches Malkuth and transitions into the next world. So if we go back actually to this original Tree of Life, everything starts up in Kether, and then it, boom, boom, moves across the Tree of Life in a lightning bolt pattern until it reaches Malkuth. And Malkuth is kind of like the final destination, the final form of that world. And Malkuth is also the door into the next world. And so the final stage of Malkuth is Earth, where, we are physically in a 3-dimensional world. Now we're going to zoom in, because we've got this big, great cosmic scale, right? And we're talking about how all things start with Kether. And since we're in the world of Atziluth, this is literally the creation of the universe. So we are literally in the Big Bang. As within, so without, right? As above, so below. When we zoom in to the Tree of Life and look at Atziluth on the microcosmic scale, we're also looking at all of the other 3 worlds, also on the microcosmic scale. they're just different versions of the same thing. They're different emanations. They're different like mirror images of the same thing that become more and more tangible. So you can imagine kind of like something being really transparent and then slowly becoming more opaque over time. As we describe Atziluth and the world of emanation, keep in mind the idea of source blooming into greater form through the singularity to the flower of life. So this little visual that I gave you earlier is a very important way of conceptualizing this idea. We've got the source consciousness, it moves spontaneously, and it expands infinitely. Keep that in mind while we talk about this. In the world of Atziluth, and really in the world, any of the worlds, we always start with the 3 veils above the Sephirot Kether. These 3 veils represent the beginning. These are the Big Bang, so to speak. These are the initial movements of source into consciousness. And the first, Ein, literally means no thingness, like nothing. And this can be thought of as the primordial singularity of the Big Bang. What scientists say about the Big Bang is that the density of the singularity is so great that all laws of physics completely dissolve and no particle or material thing is capable of existing. It's literally just pure energy, just in this tiny little ball, just writhing around, scintillating, and just super dense. But there's nothing in it. There's no thing in it because no thing can exist in it. It's just pure energy. And that's Ein. As we transition into the next stage, so as this density and the singularity begins to collapse in on itself and kind of expand, Ein Sof, meaning limitless, represents the next stage. So I would equate this next stage to anyone familiar with the Big Bang as the Planck epoch. So what that means is that the 4 fundamental forces of the universe, they're energetic forces of the universe: electromagnetic, strong nuclear, weak nuclear, and the gravitational force. So these are energies and vibrations, and they exist as one in the Planck epoch. They do not have their own separate laws or rules. They just exist as one, but they exist. And in this stage, there are no boundaries or limitations. It's eternal eternity in its purest form. Anything and everything can happen. And indeed, as the universe expanded from the Big Bang, scientists say that the density of matter and energy was so close to a critical point that the Big Bang may have very well created a flat universe instead of the 3-dimensional one that we know of. So this time period of the Planck epoch is literally, it can be anything, all of potentiality. But as it continues to expand, we finally reach Ein Sof Ur, or limitless light. And this is the point at which the Big Bang has achieved critical mass. The singularity is just about to form into the Vesica and Ein Sof Ur is what we attribute to the first sentences of the biblical passage in Genesis 1. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. This is that moment, Ein Sof Ur, limitless light. And boom, the lightning has struck. Remember how I said the light, it goes in a lightning shaped pattern? So as soon as this lightning, this limitless light just boom, explodes outwards, lightning has struck, and the singularity like combusts into all possible expressions. The universe has formed, and now it's cooling, and matter coagulates and shapeshifts into the planets, the stars, and eventually us. And this lightning bolt transition from Ein Sof Ur to Kether is the divine consciousness finally exploding in a bright pinprick of light and coughing out substance and the underlying fundamental vibrational forces that shape it. So all of the vibration, the gravitational force, the nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, now it has become differentiated and it explodes outward and it starts to move and vibrate everything around it. So I found this cool GIF, and this is a depiction of the Big Bang, and I thought it was a very good way of imagining exactly what happens in this transition from Ein to Ein Sof to Ein Sof Or to Kether in the Tree of Life, exactly how the Hermetic Kabbalists describe it. So we see the singularity, poof, limitless light, and then bang, everything explodes outwards. If you recall from our last lesson, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is an ancient text of Jewish mysticism, described how the material came into being as speech from the Holy Spirit. And on that breath are engraved the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, followed by the primordial waters, and from the waters emerge fire to create the throne. And to the 4 elements are added the 3-letter divine name, which seal the edges of the universe using the absolute and cardinal directions. This is what we described as the proto-Sephirot. And you may have noticed that fire is the last stage of this process, unlike how we're describing Atziluth as being the first. Fire is Atziluth, it's the first. When we have this limitless light bang into expression and all of the foundational forces of the universe come into being, when Ein Sof Or sends its lightning bolt energy to Kether, we can think of the sphere being activated by the emanations of divine force. So this, the speaking into a material being as speech from the Holy Spirit, I think of that as the foundational forces, electromagnetic energy, the gravitational force. This is vibration, it moves. This vibration is pulsating through the sphere, the Kether sphere, and it jingles loose everything that it embodies through this process of the letters and the waters and the fire. And the throne is what really the Kether embodies as a sphere, as a Sephirot. And as the prism of spiritual perfection, Kether's vibrational essence that was loosened by the vibration of divine force both refracts light to the next Sephirot and creates a boundary, or more accurately, a container for the divine to become encircled. So this is how consciousness goes from nothing into something. This is the very first stages. Here in Kether, it has finally taken its very first form, you can call it, but it's not quite a form yet. It's still just this inspiration. It's an idea. It's everything and nothing all at once. And Kether, the Hebrew translation of Kether, is encircled. So it has boundary. It's starting to create a boundary. And you can think of also the Indra's net from the 3D image that I showed you before, those bubbles. So Kether is like the beginning of those bubbles, shaping them. As soon as source consciousness explodes into everything that is, it doesn't really require anything else. It doesn't require like direction or guidance, or you don't need to follow a blueprint, or like refer back to your blueprints, and God doesn't just revise his blueprints and then apply it to the universe. It just kind of goes, and the stage has been set. And Kether, the first Sephirot, is that representative of spiritual perfection. So spiritual perfection, where things can fold and unfold, coagulate and dissipate with the perfection of the divine substance, moving it in an unadulterated and unpolluted fashion. So it just exists in the perfect divine light. All things are in total union, operating as this orchestra of the divine substance. And this is the seat of the aces in the tarot, the point in which anything and everything is possible and is moving in the divine rhythm of the element which defines it, whether that's air, earth, water, or fire. And if you haven't watched my series on the essential elements, I highly recommend that you do, because we cover the essential elements in very great depth there. As an aspect of fire, Kether is also will and desire. The light of source or God is the playground. To create anything, we have to imagine it first. And when we're inspired to create something, a mental image of the thing forms first before we bring it to life. And this is the nature of the relationship that Kether has to Ein Sof Or. It is the point in which the light of source and the materials of creation are diffused and start to develop polarity. You can think of Kether as the actual prism through which the light creates rainbows, and Ein Sof Or is the original light source. And the lightning bolt of emanation that continues down the tree are the resulting refracted rainbows that Kether creates. Kether is also the collective. It's ultimate unity. It translates to crown as well. So we talked about how Kether translates to encircle. Kether also translates to crown. And when you superimpose the tree of life onto the human body, you can see how it corresponds to the chakra systems. And Kether is the crown chakra or Sahasrara chakra, which is the connection to the divine and a channel for spiritual awareness and guidance. The crown chakra also defines the divine intellect and the mind's connection to it. Ultimately, Kether is the cause of causes. So here on Earth, we live in a cause and effect world. Without the wood, you can't have the fire. What came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So Kether is the chicken and the egg, and it is the fire and the wood. And if that doesn't confuse you, even the writer of the Zohar calls Kether the most hidden of all hidden things. Kether, in each of the different worlds, is the world of Atziluth on a microcosmic scale. So this actual Sephirot Kether is the world of Atziluth, the world of emanation. It's pure energy. Its wood is the divine. And it's the realm of spiritual existence, the vibrational frequency of heaven and the state of infinity. Fire is the first emanation of light that we have used on Earth. Some of the earliest uses of fire have been dated up to 790,000 years ago. Fire enabled us to expand our diets, create more complex tools, protect us from predators, and even control the ecosystem with controlled wildfires. So fire on Earth is literally the first spark for human consciousness to have had an opportunity to evolve beyond its basic survival mechanisms. In the same way, the spiritual significance of Atziluth and Kether is prescribed to fire. And just as fire spreads and consumes everything it touches and can be used to inspire so many different purposes, so does the divine desire to infinitely unfold into more complexity. Remember, the flower of life, the singularity moving infinitely. It keeps going and going and going. It just wants to keep expanding. It keeps going. The wands in tarot, they are traditionally assigned fire. So the Rider-Waite-Smith deck specifically assigns the wands fire. Same with the Thoth deck. These are traditional associations. There are some decks that associate fire with the swords and wands with air, but the traditional association from the Rider-Waite-Smith is fire. And the reason for this is because of the world of emanation, Atziluth and Kether. Aries as cardinal fire, stirring up an idea and bringing it to life. To fixed Leo, fighting for its dignity and carrying its radiance through the growing pains. So the 5 through the 7 are Leo, carrying its radiance through the growing pains. And mutable Sagittarius, taking home the learnings to expand and ignite a new passion. The Ace through 10 of Wands are on the day-to-day human level, the process of ideas, passion, inspiration, the things that give us impetus to get out of bed, the challenges we're willing to face and overcome no matter the odds, the wellspring of inner will and fortitude to create and shape whatever is within reach. Just like Kether folds and unfolds, coagulates and dissipates in the unfettered creation force of the divine playground. This is the wands in tarot. This is what it essentially embodies. And so whenever we're looking at the cards and we're thinking about this essential embodiment, it helps to provide more context to what we see in the images. And ultimately, the wands tell a story of the spiritual journey. And these are notably expressed by the court cards. So the imagery of the pyramids in the background, they directly connect the court cards to ancient wisdoms of Egypt, to the Hermetic traditions. The pyramids are the representative of that divine fire of Atziluth, representing the source of all divine wisdom and the perfect symmetry of consciousness. If you guys haven't seen this before, there is a video called The Sacred Geometry of Mathematics. And it is an amazing video about how the pyramids are actually perfectly proportional to the size of half of the earth. So if you were to take the Great Pyramid of Giza and expand it, it will fit perfectly inside of Earth with exact degrees. And different little hidden mathematics within the pyramids also include the distance from the Earth to the sun, the distance from the Earth to the moon, in addition to the diameter of the Earth, sun, and moon, and a whole bunch of other really cool sacred geometry that the ancients used to create their architecture. And so this is why we have pyramids in the court cards and why pyramids are so prolific in the wands in general. And the court cards represent the evolution of a childlike soul into a noble monarch. So just like the journey of a page to a king in medieval times, we can imagine each of the court cards as those stages of maturity that are required to reach kingship in order to have the power within necessary to rule over your own domain. So the page is the sprightly, young, and bold aspirant, the initiate to the spiritual path, ready to embrace wisdom in all its forms. He's donned in leopard print, and it's the very embodiment of determination, courage, power, and a lasting inspiration to expand into complexity. We get into the noble knight who races into the westerly direction, chasing the setting sun to enrich himself with every last ray of the powerful fire of the sun. And he's matured enough in his journey to recognize his power, to own his power, to know his power, but he must practice it still. Just like the spiritual initiate, when the spiritual initiate first encounters their own power, they must learn how to use it wisely. Endurance, fortitude, and learning how to direct inner passions and desires is the key with the Knight of Wands, or else the power of his fires could cause destruction and chaos. The Queen of Wands is in full bloom, just like a sunflower in worship of the sun. She is in her fullest embodiment of the divine feminine essence of fire, in command and content in her power. And she brings with her power protection. She brings the power of purity, so fire as a purification force. Anybody who is not worthy enough will be eradicated if they step through the fire. This is the power of the divine feminine, to uncreate as well as to create. And she also brings the blessings of the rising sun. She brings fertility, especially the kind that comes with wildfire burning. And she's also connected to Bastet, the goddess of magic, secrets, fertility, and celebration. Very powerful queen she is. I love the Queen of Wands. The King of Wands is the ultimate master of himself. He's resilient through all conflicts. He walks through fire unscathed and comes out the other side purified and empowered. He's the kind of guy who likes to walk on coals in his spare time, and his wisdom teaches us that we are the divine containers. And if only we could reconnect to the power that we have, would we understand that we can manifest anything that we desire. And his slippers are even green. So it's almost like every step that he takes blossoms and innervates the ground around him in his domain. And it's like he steps on a piece of desert and it turns into a full bloom and lush grasses. So this is the power of the spiritual journey as represented by Kether and the World of Emanation, Atziluth, that is represented in the tarot cards. It's all about having a spiritual journey, a walk through higher consciousness, developing and understanding your inner power because it is a reflection of the divine. It's all about that container of the ephemeral, the spiritual, the divine. So we're thinking about how Kether and Atziluth are literally like the very beginnings, the cosmogony, and our dreams and our unconscious mind is connected to that, which we'll describe later on with the High Priestess. Our intuition is connected to this divine consciousness. And so when we go to bed and we sleep and we dream, we have different connections to it that are represented by archetypes that we can learn to create a lexicon for in our dreams through tracking the phases of the moon. So what zodiac sign the moon is in during your dream helps inform you what the content of your symbolism in your dream means. And so the King of Wands here is being a master, having mastery over all of the elements of the conscious and unconscious mind that helps a spiritual aspirant attain enlightenment, so to speak, to be able to completely and fully embody the divine powers within. Now that we have defined the cosmogony of consciousness and how that begins in Kether, let's look at the other Sephirot in this first part of the Tree of Life, which is called the Supernal Triad. So the first three Sephirot, right after the Big Bang, these are the Sephirot of the sky, of the heavens, of the celestial. The supernal translates or means God, like godly, divine. So you can think of the three Sephirot here as literally like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. They are the triad that represents God consciousness. So anything above this dotted line here is considered to be the total God consciousness. There's nothing actually material in form. It's like if you were to visit your higher self, or if you talk to angels, or if you're in a really deep state of meditation and entering the different levels of the bardos, this is the highest level of the bardos. This is the realm of the heavenly frequencies. Below the supernal triad is the abyss. So this dotted line represents the abyss. And it also includes the hidden Sephirot dot. It's transparent for a reason, and that is because it's not included in some depictions of the Tree of Life, but it's that veil. It's in the abyss, so it's hidden by the veil of the abyss. And the abyss, also Da'at is considered to be the reflection of Kether in the material. So if we have God consciousness at the top and humans are a reflection of God, Da'at is like the Kether for the human version of God. So the abyss, it signifies a further subdivision of duality, where things are less perfect and harmonious than the divine polarities. So it's also representative of the fall of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. It's the point at which consciousness develops ego, still connected to God through the divine intellect of Da'at, but hidden behind a veil. I don't know if you guys have heard of the phrase pierce the veil, but there's a lot of terminology, especially with a lunar mansion called Hasta Nakshatra in Vedic astrology, of veil having, and oftentimes we see it in religious constructs as well, where women especially put on a hijab, or they put on a veil to cover their faces. Well, a part of that is because they are aspects of the divine feminine that have direct access to the divine, and they do not allow people who are unworthy of accessing it, or people who would abuse access to the divine. They do not, they're like guardians of God consciousness. So women are guardians of God consciousness. It's a great role. And this veil is literally the abyss. And in order to pierce the veil, you need to have the will, you need to have the ability, and you also need to have the right intentions. And Crowley describes the abyss as being guarded by the demon Choronzon. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. It's either Coranzon or Choronzon, who represents the aspects of the unconscious and conscious human tethers that block us from crossing the abyss back into the heavenly frequencies. Essentially, this demon is like the little gremlin inside of you, the shadow side, unintegrated, or the ego side, making choices only to stay safe. So women, as protectors of the heavenly frequencies, they can see right through you. Beware a woman scorned, right? And this includes any feminine, by the way, when I talk about feminine and masculine principles, like these are non-gendered. As weird as it sounds, like these are just energies. So archetypal energies that through our dysfunctional human language, we call the divine masculine and the divine feminine, but really they're just forms of energetic movement, and they coexist together. They're not separate, because everything in divinity is non-dual. It's amoral. There's no man and woman. It just is. But because we are stuck with our human language, we are stuck with duality, and we're stuck with trying to describe things in this way. A similar concept in Buddhist philosophy called sunyata describes this void space, or the abyss, of meditation as complete undifferentiation out of which duality arises. So this is the point in which all of duality comes forth. After the abyss, we start becoming more and more human. And indeed, the void space, or the abyss, is that shimmering veil of energetic force that vibrates on the scale of God, where nothing like duality or ego can exist. Like, it's at such a vibration that if you were to try to penetrate it, still thinking in dualities, you wouldn't be able to, because duality doesn't exist and your mind might break or something like that. It's the same idea of the non-self in Buddhism, or the Atman in Advaita Vedanta. It's the perfect expression of the divine substance Brahman. And I like to think of this as ego death in a psychedelic experience. If any of you have had mushrooms or DMT or ayahuasca, or like really heavy duty psychedelics, you might have experienced like either an ego death or some sort of breakthrough, where like all of a sudden, like, you know, the experience is really mild, and then all of a sudden just boom, like you just start seeing all these fractal images and things start unfolding and everything makes sense, and like you don't exist. Like the idea of you or I does not exist. This is the process of piercing the veil of the abyss and experiencing the God self as described in the Kabbalah. So there are other triads. So as you know, there's a whole tree of life. We're only talking about the first one. The next one is the ethical triad. And we're going to talk more about that in the next lesson. So for now, we're going to go back to this idea of Kether being a prism that refracts light into rainbows. And as the divine manifests deeper into the world of Atziluth, the more material it becomes, even in the supernal triangle of the celestial frequencies. As the lightning bolt of consciousness zooms to Chokmah, which is this guy right here, we have the beginning of duality. And by the way, these Hebrew wisdom, this is the Hebrew word for wisdom, and this is the Hebrew word for crown. So it's just these are the same thing. In Chokmah, we have the very beginning of duality, the very like little inklings, but it's perfect balance of opposites, like the yin yang. It's not quite duality in the way we perceive duality to be. It has no measurable boundary. It's a limitless expanse of the potentiality of all that is. All right, so we have this Ein Sof Or, boom, Big Bang. And then there was light, Kether, boom, rainbow light. And then boom, Chokmah. It's starting to take shape, but it's not quite a shape yet. It's every potential shape that it could possibly be. It's non-gendered, but it's still dual, like it has the potentiality to become dual. It's a limitless expanse of potentiality, and it relates to the verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, ... Indeed, Chokmah is the very materials by which the light of Ein Sof Or is clothed in, like a light being taking on shape and putting on a cute tunic. So now that we're starting to develop some level of form, we're starting to cover ourselves in this rainbow light, and we're starting to take shape. Very little by little, it's starting to come into form. And it's the first point in which the idea of something becomes more than just a thought. It becomes a direction. It becomes a churning movement. It becomes a source of vitality, of intuitive insight. It becomes a tool by which it can take shape, like a phallus. It becomes like a direction. And it's the starting point. It's the true starting point of creation. And it's the channel through which the rainbow colors can swirl and take form. Even though things are still undifferentiated, Chokmah is like the waters of the Father. So the semen containing the blueprints of genetic material, but those genetic materials aren't a child yet, right? They're just waters. Chokmah is in the pillar of mercy, the divine masculine side of the tree of life. So it's all about light, motion, activity, and directional force. And the divine force doesn't linger long in Chokmah. It wants to shoot out of the waters of potentiality straight into Binah. And Binah represents the feminine polarity, receptiveness, darkness, the womb, creation and destruction. It takes the light from Chokmah and refines it, weaves it, combs it out for impurities. The feminine doesn't simply allow for any manifestation to become reality. It filters it through a fine-tooth comb. And it also behaves as a hall of mirrors. So this is why I have multiple Chokmah pieces in this mirror here. It's because the light from Chokmah can then be reflected in a billion different ways. So all of potentiality can then have a reflection of itself in different shapes and forms. And this is reminiscent of the Mahavidyas in Tantra. So these are the 10 Mahavidya goddesses that are all representatives of the divine feminine. Or even Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita shows himself to Arjun in his true form. And his true form is like this infinitely expanding faces of all things and all gods and all beings in one. So Binah translates to understanding. Binah is understanding. And it takes the undifferentiated wisdom and intellect of Chokmah and distinguishes one idea from another. So it gives further shape and form to the divine force. So as we were describing here, like here's Chokmah, it's undifferentiated, and now it has 3 different ways of being expressed because of Binah. And Binah is the channeler of the divine substances, bringing together the materials of creation from Chokmah with the divine idea of Kether and molding it into a tangible image, a mirror of the divine reality. So those are our first 3 Sephirot in the Supernal Triad. And each of those Sephirot are connected by paths. And these paths are where we start diving into the Major Arcana and how the Major Arcana are represented in the Hermetic Qabalah. Okay. So now that we have a mental picture of cosmogenesis and the creation of consciousness, we can apply this to the Major Arcana beginning with the Fool. Firstly, it's important to note that the 22 paths between the Sephirot are amalgamations of the two Sephirot that they connect. So in other words, the Major Arcana that connects the two Sephirot is like the electromagnetic field that connects the North and the South Pole. So if each Sephirot is a North Pole and a South Pole, the Major Arcana is the actual field created between them. It connects the two and unifies them. And really all of them bleed together in some ways because they are not mutually exclusive of one another. Like the only reason we as humans have these diagrams is so that we can try to meditate on them and understand them on a less superficial level than on a piece of paper. Because remember, like everything ascends and descends in perpetuity. Everything kind of blends together and comes together in and out, coagulates and dissipates. Like this is something that happens spontaneously. This is what happens in our thoughts when we are in deep meditation. It just happens. Like, there's no need to force it, but we can direct it with our consciousness. So same thing here with the Major Arcana. It is an archetypal amalgam of two Sephirot. So when we separate these things out to understand them, we integrate them together with wisdom. And the Fool, for example, is both the nothingness and eternity of Kether and the potentiality of all creation in Hokmah. It's the 0-point field, which contains radiation of several magnitudes of energy. The Fool is radiant. Like the Fool is the container of all things and all possibilities and all potentialities. In the Thoth tarot deck, the Fool carries a bag that contains all of the zodiac signs inside of it. So the Fool has not yet become something that is dual. The Fool is still existing in this idea of undifferentiated divine consciousness, and it's faced with this choice. It's like in this vacuum of space where potentiality, nothingness are juicy and overflow of divine force, and it's ready to take shape and burst forth into Hokmah and radiate, but it hasn't quite reached its zenith yet. And it's that initial transition between spiritual consciousness and higher consciousness, that first step of hanging in the balance where a choice must be made to take the leap of faith or not to take the leap of faith. Because as soon as you take that leap of faith, all of the events, they will happen no matter what you do. Like it's completely out of your control what happens next when you take a leap of faith. You go into the abyss, you leap into the unknown, right? And that's the beginning of the spiritual path. The Fool is the initiate, the very beginning of the spiritual path. And he's represented by the element air. So this is the element air here on the path here. It's a little triangle with a line through it. And the element air is the breath, literally the vital life force of our bodies. It's how we stay alive. And it's also the Anahata chakra or the heart chakra. Air is the space between the heaven and earth, the realm of suspension and constant movement. It's this realm of like seemingly contradictory things. And the Fool is that initiation point. And the Fool's Hebrew letter here is Aleph. And Aleph is a silent letter. It doesn't have a sound. It must be paired with another letter to form a sound. So the Fool is like in this soundless vacuum, just like the breath that sustains life makes no noise. And Aleph also corresponds, Aleph also corresponds to the ox, which is a beast of the earth. So the Fool connects the divine to the earthly because they are born out of spirit, and their potentiality, the Fool's potentiality, is kind of like earth that needs to be tilled for the seeding, for it to be planted. The Fool, I have an article on my website where I break down like a whole bunch of It's basically like a dissertation on the Fool and all of the different correspondences that the Fool has. You can go really deep into it, from the historical context to the astrological context to all of the colors, to the different symbols that are on the Fool's dress, to the dog. But this is strictly the Hermetic Qabalah version of the Fool, as being this creator, this potentiality of existence, the 0 point potentiality. So next we have the Magician. And the Magician is another facet of creation force, which connects Kether and Binah. It's like the mirror opposite of the Fool. And the Magician is the one capable of manifesting something out of nothing simply by using the creation force materials. So taking everything from Kether and being like, I choose this, and I'm making it real. And Binah, being the mirror reflection of all things, the Magician is like, I want this, Binah, go ahead and reflect it, and then shoots it down the tree of life into Malkuth and into manifest reality. So the Magician is the feminine channel, capable of absorbing and accepting all possible outcomes and potentialities, and then transfiguring them using the spiritual tools and wisdom needed to create an effect. So the Magician is a master of cause and effect. It knows that Kether, as the cause of all causes, is what he can use to manifest things into reality. The Magician is the master of the laws of the universe and holds within him the infinitely expanding and contracting layers of sacred geometry, from the infinity symbol to the Ouroboros, which is his belt, all the way to the essential elements laid out before him. So the wands, the cups, the pentacles, and the swords, these are all the creation materials that he uses to manifest. And ultimately, the Magician is a transmitter of the will of the divine and communicates to the earthly plane the ways in which other initiates can learn to use their power. This is why he is associated with Mercury. And Mercury is often related to Hermes Trismegistus, who is the writer of the Corpus Hermeticum, which Hermeticism is based off of, or Thoth, the Egyptian god of magic and writing, the Egyptian god of scribes. And the planet Mercury is also the planet of the alchemists, and the alchemists are the masters of transmuting materials into something else. So in this way, the Magician is a clear channel, and he allows light to pass through him distinctly and transparently. The light of the divine consciousness passes through him, and he almost behaves as a projector. So when light passes through him, he projects what he desires, what he wants, into the reflection of the mirror of Binah. And on it goes down the tree into Malkuth, and boom, we have, a rabbit coming out of a hat. The Hebrew letter associated with him, Bet, translates to house. So it's literally like the construct of a thing. It doesn't have to be an actual home. It can be an actual home. It can also be the human body or a temple. You may have heard of the idea that the body is a temple. The point is that the Magician has built himself up. His body is a conduit of form and illusion, the projector of divine light. Bet. He has constructed himself as a projector of divine light. Let me answer your question twofold. So, I think your point is completely valid, and I think that being able to direct things, so taking something and directing it is a very masculine type energy, because it's very phallic in nature, being able to direct energy in different places. But the reason in Kabbalah the Magician is a feminine archetype is because it is on the left-hand side of the tree of life, the pillar of severity. And the pillar of severity is the feminine polarity. And it's a receptive polarity. It's all about the idea of the womb, how the womb is a container of the soul of a child, and receives the download of a child, and it creates a portal for the child to go through. The womb is that space of the Magician. So the Magician imagine like a little magician inside of a womb, and the magician's like, hey, I want a soul to come download into this womb. And it downloads into the womb and then actually creates a human, and then the human is birthed through the channel of the yoni, or the portal of Binah. So that is why the magician is feminine in polarities, because he transmutes. He doesn't actually direct things. He just becomes a vessel of whatever it is that he wants to transmit. But I like the idea of the magician being a masculine polarity too. But again, like, this is a space, the supernal triad is a space where there really isn't that much duality, right? So like, these things can coexist together without being contradictions. And that's the cool thing about this little triad here, is like, it's all about anything and everything being possible. So before we talk about the High Priestess, the High Priestess is 2 in the Major Arcana. I'm going to touch on the Empress, because the High Priestess deserves a little bit more time in another session, especially when we start talking about the ethical triangle. The High Priestess starts to make a lot more sense when we get into the more human matters of things. But the Empress is the first of the Major Arcana to connect the 2 pillars. So the Empress connects the 2 polarities here. The Empress is the ultimate receptive void for the divine. So she is literally like the thing that creates milk, the thing that creates milk to nurture and nourish the universe with the divine light. So she can mold and shapeshift this divine force into something of substance, something that can nourish, something that can grow. And she's represented by the planet Venus, and Venus in this sense being universal love, like the universal passions of desire. And then on the other hand, also the Venusian capability of uncreation. So earlier we talked about the feminine ability to create and to destroy. And as we spoke to with the veils, the feminine being the protector of the veil between worlds, the feminine force, or Shakti force, it innervates and energizes, but at the same time, it's very picky and discerning, and it will only innervate and energize the most beautiful of all things. And so just like a water nourishes a riverbank, giving way to sprouts and mosses, it's like this ability of water to cultivate and create the beautiful abundance and the perfect balance of the ecosystem on Earth. Like, nothing really on Earth exists just for the sake of existing. It has some sort of purpose. It has some sort of thing that it is a part of. It's part of this like ecosystem of nature, constantly maintaining homeostasis. And so the Empress is this figure that desires to maintain that homeostasis, that balance between the polarities of the severity and mercy, to have that perfect union of Chokmah and Binah, of wisdom and understanding. And so in this way, she's also the zodiac signs, because the zodiac signs and the movement of the earth in relation to the stars, or rather the movement of the stars in relation to Earth, like all of this is in a perfect balance that corresponds to the vortex of the solar system and the greater movement of the universe as a whole. So all of these things are the realm of the Empress. She is the direct embodiment of understanding and wisdom. She knows exactly what to do or say to generate a feeling or an action that moves you, entices you, and titillates you, that feminine sexual energy of like moving with the rhythms of all things. And the Hebrew letter Daleth translates to door. So she is literally a portal between the divine substance and the next stages of manifestation below the abyss. So you can think of her as like the cervix of the womb, where that is the first opening through the vaginal canal and the multidimensional tunnel of the vesica piscis, or the idea of the yoni. So this central piece of the vesica piscis being the yoni, that is the realm of the Empress. She's the first thing that you pass through in order to become human. Finally, the High Priestess. So the High Priestess is the second Major Arcana card after the Magician. But I'm speaking to her as our honorable last mention because of her function as an intermediary between the divine realms and where she lives in the abyss. So the High Priestess, her realm is Da'at, this realm of knowledge, and it's that realm that's hidden in the veils of the abyss. And Da'at is hidden away for a reason. So Da'at is a bridge through the abyss that's been hidden by the illusions of duality. And it's almost like this intentional thing to hide the bridge to the divine. Again, referencing the worthiness, quote unquote, or rather like the vibrational match of our ability to become vibrational matches to the heavenly frequencies or the divine frequencies is up to our own true will. And if our true will has any level of vibration that is operating, I guess you could call them the hell frequencies, but again, like this isn't like duality, just doesn't really speak justice to the actual breadth and depth of the divine, because all of this stuff exists within us as humans. Like this tree of life, it is us. And not just like this external thing of how creation came to be. No, like these are our chakras. These are this is the way that we think, feel, and create, and how we procreate, and what moves us sexually, what drives us. Like this is us. So within us, we have the capacity to hold both heavenly and hell frequencies. And if we are in hell frequencies, then we cannot access the heavenly frequencies as easily, because when we try to penetrate the abyss or penetrate the veil, we aren't the right match energetically to pierce it. And Da'at kind of functions as this bridge. So Da'at is this this bridge of the High Priestess, where if you know what to do, you can move your way through without being a vibrational match to the abyss. This is what some people call the cheater's power. And the cheater's power is like basically like dark magic, quote unquote, like magic that involves the use of power, taking power, in a way that doesn't belong to you. So you don't earn that power, because all of these powers, all of our clairsentience, clairvoyance, etc., like our spiritual powers, they have to be earned. We don't just get them for nothing. But sometimes we might encounter entities or plant spirits, like the plant medicines in the Amazon. There are some plant medicines that actually give you spiritual powers, like being able to inflict affects onto people. So like, I want to make you feel angry. This plant medicine gives you the power to make other people feel angry for no reason. So this is a cheater's power. You haven't earned that right. You haven't earned the right to use it because you've just been given it, or like making a deal with the devil, so to speak. So there's some sort of consequence to that where you aren't a vibrational match. So the High Priestess in this regard, she is the cycles of the divine feminine. So she's the very substance of death, rebirth, and karma. You can think of her as kind of like Kali. She is the creator and the destroyer of all worlds, and she is also the dispenser of justice, and she will not hesitate to rip your head off. But at the same time, she's also balance. So the High Priestess sits on the central pillar of equilibrium, And it's all about having the balance between the two. So severity and mercies, and having the balance is the key. And the High Priestess serves as the unifying intelligence. So she connects Kether to a later Sephirot called Tiphereth, which is not shown here. Tiphereth is further down the tree. And we'll cover Tiphereth in another lesson, but she represents the secret intellect of the unconscious mind. So the realm of the human brain that contains the blueprints for accessing the divine intelligence. So this figure of the High Priestess, like, she's very fertile, she's very rich with the divine knowledge, and her Hebrew letter Gimel translates to camel. So obviously a camel is an animal that carries water in its humps, and it survives in the desert through its ability to retain its waters. So the High Priestess is also associated with the moon. And the moon are the feminine waters of the womb, again, kind of like the Empress, reminding us that we must connect to our inner waters in order to carry us through the abyss. So connecting to the unifying intellect of the divine consciousness, and also finding balance between mercy and severity, finding balance between the feminine and the masculine, being able to direct your consciousness at will, while at the same time being able to be receptive and fully creative, is the key. So she's essentially the key to traversing the abyss into the heavenly frequencies. And so in tarot, like, as in terms of like a card reading, the High Priestess is always going to be a reference to your unconscious mind, to finding spiritual balance, to assessing whether or not you're using your power destructively. So we'll get more into detail on the High Priestess in a later lesson. But for now, that's all I have for you on the world of Atziluth and the world of emanation of fire, the wands, and the supernal triad. So I hope that it has been informative. I'm running a summit. It's a completely free summit called the Aquarius Collective. And I've been interviewing a bunch of people about a whole variety of spiritual topics. There's a gentleman that I interviewed where we talked about Advaita Vedanta and Hermeticism and how to create practical paradigms to change your mindset. That was a really fun interview. I interview Sierra as well, and we talk about intuition development and how to eliminate limiting self-beliefs and the victim mindset, so that you can be your most truest self. And we talk about Vedic astrology, we talk about synchronicities, we talk about hypnotism. It's a whole bunch of cool topics with a bunch of really great people that I've been so honored to collaborate with, because they are so intelligent, so worldly, full of wisdom, and they all contribute this little piece to the cosmic puzzle that I'm trying to bring in the summit. I'm trying to show the cosmic puzzle and all the different pieces that are a part of it in one spot. So register for free until July 7th. It's completely free until July 7th. After July 7th, it's $99.